Well, that day, I know it had rained for, I think it was a whole week. And it was 18 inches or above, something like that. And of course, in the valley, that translates to a little bit more in the San Lorenzo Valley always. And I was working downtown for two different people, the insurance company right around the corner of Laurel and Pacific, and I got my first job, which was my dream job, at Woolworths. And I went to work that evening, December 22nd, that evening, and I was going to work through the holidays. Of course, that job lasted the 5 hours I put in on that night. And then I went to a friend's house for a kind of a little senior party on the 22nd, probably, I would say 8 o'clock, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. And we knew that the river was pretty swollen, and always, every year, it went over at Ocean and Barson and around that area. So when they said it was going to flood, we didn't think too much of it, Okay, all the low-lying areas are going to flood. That's pretty common. And then much later, I think it was after 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, we were at the party up on Laurel Street, just 2 houses up from Foster Freeze. And all of a sudden the wires started coming up Laurel Street. Yow, this is a flood. And we were in a 2-story house. And then when the water, there was probably 10 steps up the porch. And we figured, well, it'll come up the steps. Little did we know that little by little, it started invading the house and coming up the first story. And I can't remember, but it was either 5 or 6 feet inside the house, even after coming up the steps, which were, higher, that made the house higher. And we kept going up the stairs, and finally we were sitting most of the night on the 2nd story landing, watching the water. Couldn't believe it. The refrigerator was almost covered with water, and never did I think to ask afterwards. I'm sure they had to replace everything in the house, in the downstairs part, excuse me. And then the next day, after we kept watching, and I know the young guys that were there, they got a hold of a rowboat, was right around the area, and there were several elder people living in those little houses on Laurel Street in the 2nd block. And they went around and took them out and took them up Laurel Street to the higher ground. And the next day, then, the water did recede some, slowly, but around noon or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we could walk out to Laurel School, to the outer edge of Laurel School, and it was probably, I'd say, waist high. We were carrying our stuff above our head to get there, and my parents came and picked us up. And I didn't know too much about what was going on Pacific Avenue till later. I didn't witness anything going on Pacific Avenue, but I went down to the real estate office that I was working at through the school program and helped a little bit clean up, and the silt was just unimaginable on the paperwork. But we saved a lot of the paperwork by gently pulling all of the papers away. Of course, now everything would be on a flash drive and you'd grab the flash drive, but then every paper counted. And then, of course, I heard later. And I had put away on layaway my mother's Christmas gift. They let the students do that at the time. At least layaway, a department was in the basement. So needless to say, I did not get that. And I thought many years later when I was relating the story, I don't think Leask ever gave me my money back, which was a very small amount. But I know that they were driving the cars. All the car dealers were on Front Street at the time. And they were driving the cars up to King Street and up around Mission Street to get them out of the floodwaters. But we were told that there were tunnels under Pacific Avenue, and apparently all the tunnels got full too from, I don't know, maybe that's what ruined. I know they had to dig up some of the streets, and or I don't know if that time, that might have been later in the 89 flood that they actually did.
Earthquake.
I mean, earthquake, yeah. But they did have to do a lot of repair work for 55 too. And in my opinion, it really changed the face of downtown. So many businesses went out. Like we used to go to the Garibaldi Hotel, which when I was a child I thought was out in the river. But it was on the river's edge, and it was just destroyed. And so many businesses just didn't come back after the flood. And the ones that did, of course, it took them time because the silt was just, it's like a fine sand, and there's probably marks around town that show how high the flood was. And that's kind of my recollection. And then, of course, most of the other things I found out about the flood was hearsay or stories or through the Sentinel and such, you know. I didn't witness Pacific Avenue except the aftermath of it. But that was really something to see our downtown right there on Laurel Street underwater. And I don't know how they ever cleaned up after all that. Every, thing cleaned up after all that. I'm sure the power was out, and I know the phones were out because we couldn't call. And so that's what I remember. And my husband, now, we were just starting to go out in high school, and he came by earlier in the evening and wanted me to give me a ride home. And I said, no, I'll stay for a while. And he had had a tooth pulled that day, so he couldn't stay. But he worked at Modern Bakery, which was just now Kumba Jazz Center, right, which was real close to the house. And he had to go in and really clean up the next day, a couple of days too. But he was at Modern. He had gotten off work at Modern Bakery. Now I think he just came from the dentist at that time, but that had a dentist. He wasn't feeling too good. But I declined the ride home at that time.
Of course. How was Santa Cruz different before the flood?
Oh, it was just very quiet in the wintertime. It was really a summer tourist town. Summer was just, the population just expanded tremendously, of course. And it was, everything closed down. You could go down on a Sunday evening on Pacific Avenue after 5 o'clock. Nothing was open. Maybe a restaurant, maybe the movies. But there weren't people walking around. It was just a quiet tourist town. And in the winter, some businesses even closed, if they were catering to the summer tourists. So I think in that way, I don't know whether that really changed it. I don't think it destroyed as many buildings as like later, but it changed businesses. Some, say the ones that had to go out. And the car dealers, that's what was different. They all moved out from Front Street. They were down in where the water was.
Where did they go?
A lot of them to the east side. I can't remember where a lot of... I know Ford moved to the east side, and I think Chevrolet stayed downtown. There weren't imported cars then.
Right.
Yeah, we only had the American car dealerships. And I know that Chrysler Plymouth was right by what is now the Broadway Bridge, which wasn't there. It was in that little, it's kind of a triangular corner, near the arena.
Right.
Where the arena is.